They say the deepest wounds aren't caused by enemies. Strangers might cheat you, rivals might deceive you, but when betrayal comes from family, it pierces the heart in a way nothing else can. Would you still trust your family if they humiliated you in front of the whole world? Would you forgive them? Or would you stand up and demand the respect you deserve? My name is Dorothy, though most people call me Dot, and I'm 72 years old. I've seen my share of storms. I buried my husband, Harold, after 43 years of marriage. I've raised children, held jobs that never paid enough, and stretched every dollar until it nearly tore in half. Life has tested me in ways I never imagined, but the test that almost broke me didn't come from life itself. It came from my own daughter's husband, the man I once believed I could trust with both my child's happiness and my family's future. This isn't an old story. It's not something that happened decades ago, lost in the fog of memory. No, this happened recently, when I thought I'd reached a stage of life where the worst surprises were already behind me. I was wrong. Let me ask you this. Have you ever sacrificed for someone you love, only to be pushed aside as though you were nothing? Have you ever been excluded from the very celebration you made possible? If so, you know the kind of pain that steals your sleep, the kind that leaves you staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering how the people you love could treat you like a burden. That was me. My son-in-law, David, came to me with a dream. A brewery, a gastropub, a chance to finally prove himself. He didn't just want money, he wanted trust. He wanted me to take a chunk of my savings, money Harold and I had built over a lifetime of hard work, and pour it into his vision. And because I believed in my daughter's faith in him, because I adored my grandchildren and wanted them to see their father succeed, I agreed. I gave him $20,000. I wasn't naive. I knew it was a risk. But I thought family mattered more than numbers on a balance sheet. I thought loyalty would mean something. I thought that when David stood in front of his new business, raising a glass in triumph, I would be there, surrounded by neighbors, relatives, and friends, watching my investment turn into legacy. Instead, I was left sitting at home, uninvited, forgotten, cast aside as though I didn't exist. Everyone was welcome at the grand opening. His parents, my daughter's coworkers, even people from down the street who'd never given him a dime. Everyone except me, the woman who made it possible. I won't lie to you. When I learned the truth, it felt like my chest was caving in. I'd already been battling the loneliness of widowhood, the silence of a house that had grown too quiet, and the constant worry that my health and finances wouldn't last me through my later years. To discover that the people I'd sacrificed for could erase me so easily, it broke something inside me. But let me also tell you this. Age has its advantages. People underestimate you. They assume you'll stay quiet, that you'll accept disrespect because you don't have the strength to fight back. They forget that we elders didn't survive decades of hardship by being weak. We carry wisdom, memory, and more grit than most will ever understand. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to fade into the background. I wasn't going to let David rewrite the story of his success without me in it. If he thought he could use my money and silence me, he was about to learn that a 72-year-old grandmother can be far more dangerous than he ever imagined. This is my story, not just about money, not just about betrayal, but about dignity. About standing up when the people closest to you push you down. About proving that even in your golden years, you can still command respect, demand justice, and teach the younger generation a lesson they'll never forget. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share is not simply the tale of a failed promise. It's the journey of how a grandmother, armed with nothing more than courage, wit, and an unshakable sense of self-worth, turned humiliation into triumph. But before I take you there, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tell us where you're watching from. After Harold passed, the house seemed to echo with silence. 43 years of marriage had given me a life filled with routine. The scrape of his chair across the kitchen floor, the thump of his boots at the door, the way he'd whistle when he watered the garden. When he was gone, it all faded into memory. Now it was just me, the clock ticking in the kitchen, and the occasional call from one of the kids. I wasn't destitute. Harold and I had always been careful. His job with the post office, my years working part-time at the library. We saved a little each month, even when it hurt. By the time he passed, we had a cushion. Not a fortune, but enough to give me peace of mind. I guarded it fiercely. It wasn't for extravagance. It was for survival, hospital bills, medications, maybe even the possibility of assisted living one day. At 72, those were the things I worried about. That's why I grew uneasy the morning my daughter Rebecca came flying into my kitchen. She didn't knock, didn't pause, just breezed in with all the force of a summer storm. "Mom, you'll never guess," she exclaimed, dropping her purse on the counter. She looked just like she had when she was 8 years old and begging me for a puppy. Bright eyes, pleading smile, full of a hope that made it hard to say no. I set my coffee down slowly. "All right, honey. What's the news?" "It's David," she said, her whole face glowing. "He's finally got his chance. A perfect location opened up downtown near the ballpark. He's going to start his own craft brewery and gastropub. Mom, this is it, his big break. David, my son-in-law of 12 years. Handsome in a way that had always turned heads, charming enough to win people over in minutes. But Harold had never trusted him. My husband used to mutter, 'That boy has champagne taste on a beer budget.' It used to irritate me. Harold was blunt to a fault, but I had to admit, David's track record didn't inspire confidence. Failed landscaping venture. A short-lived house-flipping scheme that swallowed $15,000. A string of jobs he quit whenever the pressure mounted. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "those businesses need a lot of capital. Has he secured financing?" Her smile faltered and my stomach dropped. I already knew where this conversation was headed. "Well, that's the problem," she admitted. "His credit took a hit after the house flipping. Banks won't give him what he needs. But he's been preparing for this for months. He's taken brewing courses, drawn up a business plan, even talked to suppliers. He's so passionate about this, Mom. He just needs someone to believe in him." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. She hesitated, then said softly, 20,000. The number nearly made me choke. 20,000, almost a quarter of the savings Harold and I had built over a lifetime. "Becky," I said, shaking my head, "that's not a small amount." "I know, Mom, but this is different. He's finally found something he's meant to do. He's confident this will succeed. He even projected he could pay you back in 18 months, with interest." Her voice carried such conviction that for a moment, I almost believed it myself. Almost. But Harold's voice echoed in my memory. "Dot, you can't build a future on charm. Numbers matter. Effort matters. People show you who they are if you pay attention." I wanted to ask her the hard questions. What happens if the business fails? What about the grandchildren's needs? But as I looked at her face, I saw not just a 45-year-old woman, but the little girl who used to bring me wildflowers, insisting they were the prettiest things in the world. She had always believed in people, sometimes too much. "Please, Mom," she whispered. "David swears this is the last time. He wants to make you proud. He wants the kids to have something to look up to." The thought of my grandchildren, 8-year-old Tommy with his dinosaur obsession and 10-year-old Katie who loved curling up with books, pulled at my heart. What kind of grandmother would I be if I didn't support their father? What kind of mother would I be if I crushed my daughter's faith in her husband? Still, my chest tightened with unease. "I'll need to see the business plan," I said finally. Relief washed over her face. She flew across the table and hugged me tight, her perfume filling the air. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this. David will make you proud." 2 weeks later, David appeared at my door with a manila folder. He strode into Harold's old recliner without being asked, grinning like he owned the place. "Dorothy, you're an angel," he said. He handed me the folder, which looked as though it had been tossed around the back seat of his truck. Inside, I found charts and projections filled with buzzwords. Craft beer revolution, farm-to-table experience, targeting millennials. The numbers looked impressive until you realized they were built on assumptions and best-case scenarios. He predicted profits within 6 months, repayment in 18. "David," I said carefully, adjusting my glasses, "these numbers seem optimistic. What happens if it takes longer to attract customers?" "Dorothy, I've been in food service for over a decade. I know what people want. This location is perfect. Foot traffic from the stadium, the convention center, new apartments. We're not just selling beer, we're selling an experience. And competition? I asked. He waved the question away. Competition makes you better. We'll stand out. Becky, sitting beside him, looked at me with pleading eyes. She wanted this to happen more than anything. When David finally left that day, folder under his arm, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at Harold's empty chair. I could almost hear his voice. Don't do it, Dot. He'll sweet-talk you right out of your savings. But then I thought about the grandchildren, about Rebecca's desperate hope. Later, I called Harold's old friend Bill Hutchinson, my financial advisor. Dot, are you sure about this? He asked. 20 grand is a lot in your situation. It's for family, I replied. You've said that before. What about your future? Medical bills, assisted living? I'm 72, not 92, I said firmly, and I'd rather help them now than leave money after I'm gone. Bill sighed. Think about it for a week. But the truth was, I had already decided. That evening, I called Rebecca and told her I would transfer the money by the end of the month. She cried with gratitude. The night before I signed the papers, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I spoke softly to Harold, the way I sometimes did when the loneliness became too heavy. Harold, I hope I'm making the right choice. This money is all we save together. But maybe it's time to invest in new life, new dreams. Maybe this is how I take care of our girl even now. If Harold had an opinion, the silence in the room kept it hidden. 3 days later, the transfer was complete. David called, his voice bubbling with excitement. Dorothy, I can't thank you enough. You'll see. This time is different. You're going to be sitting at the best table in the house when it all pays off. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I wasn't making a mistake. But deep down, a quiet unease lingered, whispering that I might regret the trust I had just given away. Winter in Colorado can feel endless, and that year the snow seemed determined to bury me alive. The drifts piled high against the porch railings. The furnace ran day and night, and each bill that came through the mail felt heavier than the last. Still, every time I pulled on my cardigan and opened my checkbook, I reminded myself that things would get better soon. I had invested in David's dream. Once his business opened, the money would come back. That was what I told myself whenever doubt crept in. But doubt has a way of whispering louder when answers are hard to find. The first warning sign was silence. After his enthusiastic phone call confirming the money had landed in his account, David seemed to disappear. No quick updates, no visits to the house, no word of progress. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Starting a business is a lot of work. Maybe he was buried under paperwork and planning. But as the weeks rolled on, silence stretched into something far more unsettling. When I asked Rebecca how things were going, she brushed me off with vague lines. You know how David is when he's focused, she'd say. He's putting in long hours, meeting with contractors, handling permits. He hardly sleeps. She spoke as though his absence was a mark of dedication, but the details were always foggy, and whenever I pressed for specifics, who the contractors were, whether permits had been approved, she changed the subject. By February, curiosity won out over politeness. I bundled up in my heaviest coat and drove downtown to the address David had given me. Blake Street had changed since my younger years. Once a stretch of warehouses and empty storefronts, it had transformed into a trendy district of boutiques and specialty shops. His building was easy enough to spot, a narrow brick structure wedged between a vintage clothing store and a hot sauce shop. A banner hung in the window, "Coming soon, Hops and Harmony Brewing Company," but the windows themselves were covered in brown paper. Through a gap in the corner, I caught a glimpse of the inside: bare floors, stacks of drywall, a few workers sitting on overturned buckets, sipping coffee. It didn't look like the hub of activity I had expected. Driving home, my chest tightened the way it sometimes did when my blood pressure was acting up. I told myself not to overthink it. Renovations take time, but the unease wouldn't let go. That evening, I called Rebecca. Honey, I drove by the place today. She hesitated. Oh, how did it look? Like not much was happening. Are you sure everything's on track? Her pause stretched too long before she answered. Mom, Construction projects don't always look like progress from the outside. Plumbing, wiring, permits. Most of it is behind the walls. David says they're moving forward. I wanted to believe her, but her voice carried the same tone she'd used as a teenager whenever she was trying to convince me she hadn't been out past curfew. Well, I said quietly, I hope he knows what he's doing. She rushed to reassure me. He does. But Mom, maybe don't drive by too often. David's under a lot of pressure and he might feel like you don't trust him. Don't trust him. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. After all, I had trusted him with $20,000. Wasn't that proof enough? March rolled in with biting winds, and with it came my quarterly checkup. Dr. Patterson frowned as he reviewed my blood pressure readings. Dorothy, these numbers concern me. Are you under any unusual stress? I almost laughed. How could I explain that the knot in my stomach was tied to a man who'd promised to turn my savings into a legacy, but wouldn't even return my calls? Just the usual worries, I said instead. Getting older isn't easy. He adjusted my prescription and advised me to seek more social connection. Isolation can be just as dangerous as poor diet or lack of exercise, he warned. Isolation. That word followed me home. It wrapped itself around me as I realized how rarely I saw my daughter these days. The grandchildren, once my Sunday companions, were suddenly too busy. Soccer practices, birthday parties, errands. My neighbor, Mrs. Wong, was kind, but our conversations rarely went deeper than the weather. My bridge club had dissolved after 2 of the ladies moved to Florida and another entered assisted living. The library where I used to volunteer had cut back on programs. So I found myself talking to Harold. I'd wash dishes and mutter under my breath. Remember when Becky was 16 and wanted to lend her boyfriend money for a car? You told her no in 2 seconds flat. You said people who asked for money too quickly usually haven't earned it. Maybe you were right. But Harold, as always, kept his opinions to himself. By April, my unease turned into obsession. I drove by Hops and Harmony at least twice a week. Sometimes I saw lights flickering inside. Sometimes I didn't. The brown paper stayed on the windows. On one occasion, I thought I spotted David's truck, but when I circled back, it was gone. Finally, I decided to confront him directly. I dialed his cell phone, a number I rarely used, since Rebecca was usually the go-between. It rang to voicemail. Hi, David. It's Dorothy. I was just wondering how the restaurant is coming along and whether there's anything I can do to help. Please give me a call when you have a chance. No call came. 2 days later, I tried again. Same result. By the 3rd unanswered call, my patience began to fray. I phoned Rebecca. Honey, I've been trying to reach David, but he hasn't returned my calls. Oh, Mom, he's just swamped. You know how he gets when he's working on something important. I just want to know how things are progressing. As an investor, I think I have a right to stay informed. The word investor hung in the air between us like smoke. Of course you do, she said quickly. I'll make sure he calls you tonight. That evening, the phone rang. David's voice carried its usual charm, but beneath it I detected strain. Dorothy, sorry I missed your calls. Things are crazy. Contractors, suppliers, city inspectors. You know how it is. Actually, I don't, I replied evenly. That's why I've been asking. He chuckled, a little forced. We're aiming for late June or early July. Perfect timing. Baseball season, tourists, warm evenings. Once we open, cash flow won't be an issue. You'll get every penny back. Just like I promised. Something in his tone reminded me of the car salesman who once tried to talk me into an unnecessary warranty. Smooth, practiced, but hollow. Still, I held my tongue. All right, David. I'll look forward to seeing it. June arrived with record heat, and with it, news that the grand opening was finally scheduled. Rebecca called, practically bursting with excitement. Mom, you're going to be so proud. David's planned an amazing event for July 4th weekend. Live music, food trucks, tastings. The whole neighborhood is buzzing about it. That sounds wonderful, I said. What time should I be there? There was silence. Not the brief pause of someone checking a calendar, but the heavy silence of someone stalling for courage. Well, she said slowly, David thought maybe it would be better if you didn't come to the opening. He's worried the crowds and noise might be too much for you with your heart condition. He wants to give you a special tour afterward, when things are calmer. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $20,000, nearly a quarter of my life savings. And yet I was being told I wasn't welcome at the event that money had made possible. I kept my voice steady. I see. Please don't be upset, Mom. David really appreciates everything you've done. He just wants to make sure your first visit is special, not chaotic. After we hung up, I sat in Harold's old recliner staring at the family photos on the mantel. Pictures of weddings, birthdays, Christmas mornings, smiling faces. And yet, as I studied them, I realized I wasn't in any recent ones. Somewhere along the way, I had been fading from their picture. That night, I drove downtown. Blake Street was alive with laughter and music, people spilling out of restaurants and bars. Hops and Harmony was lit up from within. Through the window, I saw polished tables, copper brewing tanks, and a crowd of smiling guests. I spotted familiar faces, Rebecca's coworkers, David's relatives, even neighbors from their street. Everyone seemed welcome, everyone except me. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching through the windshield as David moved through the crowd like a man on top of the world. My daughter laughed at his side. My grandchildren, wearing matching shirts, handed him flowers to applause. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached. My heart didn't just ache, it burned with a question I couldn't silence. What else weren't they telling me? And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind that maybe, just maybe, I had been deceived from the start. What would you do if your family stopped answering after borrowing such a large amount? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories. I have always been a sound sleeper. Harold used to tease me that I could nap through a thunderstorm and not stir. But after that conversation with Rebecca, after she told me I wasn't welcome at the grand opening, I couldn't close my eyes without replaying her words. Too crowded, too noisy, too much for your heart, Mom. That was the night I stopped sleeping easily. The grand opening was set for July 3rd, right in the middle of holiday celebrations. On the 2nd, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to see the truth with my own eyes. If they thought they could keep me away, they didn't know me as well as they thought. I drove downtown early and parked across the street from Hops and Harmony. I brought a thermos of coffee, my notebook, and the reading glasses Harold used to tease me about. If I was going to sit outside like some kind of amateur detective, I was going to do it properly. By 6 that evening, the sidewalks were alive with energy. People streamed into the restaurant in groups, couples, families, neighbors. The brown paper that had covered the windows for months was gone. In its place, glowing lights illuminated polished wooden tables, shiny copper tanks, and walls decorated with local art. A chalkboard by the entrance advertised, "Grand opening July 3rd, live music, food, and fun." I sat in my car and watched. One by one, the faces came into view. David's brother, his cousins, co-workers from Rebecca's office, even Mrs. Patterson from down the street, the same woman who complained every time my grandkids ran through my yard, was walking inside, laughing with a friend. And then came the sharpest cut of all. My grandchildren. Katie and Tommy were dressed in matching shirts that read, "Hops and Harmony Crew." They carried small bouquets of flowers, and as they handed them to David, the crowd cheered. He scooped them up in his arms, kissed their foreheads, and smiled as cameras flashed. I gripped my pen so tightly I nearly snapped it. Those shirts weren't last-minute purchases. That ceremony with the flowers had been planned, rehearsed, celebrated. My grandchildren had been given a role, and I had been given an excuse. I wrote in my notebook, "They erased me." At 7:30, I saw Rebecca arrive in a blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked radiant, clapping proudly as David gave his speech. The crowd leaned in as he gestured toward the tanks behind him. Though I couldn't hear the words, I knew what he was saying, spinning the story of how his dream had come to life. But not once did he gesture toward the street, where the woman who had given him $20,000 sat hidden in the shadows. At 8, a local news crew pulled up. The camera zoomed in on David, capturing the moment he cut the ribbon. I watched as Rebecca and the children posed for family photos, a perfect picture of success, without the grandmother who had made it possible. The humiliation cut deep, but anger soon rose to meet it. Anger that pulsed hot and steady, stronger than the ache in my joints or the worry about my heart. By the time the band struck up at 9, I had seen enough. I closed my notebook and drove home, the night buzzing around me. My mind refused to settle. Every face I had recognized in that restaurant reminded me of just how deliberate my exclusion had been. The next morning, I did something unusual. I went to church. Not out of sudden devotion, but because I knew David's parents would be there. If I couldn't get answers from my daughter, perhaps his family would be less guarded. Sure enough, I found Frank and Meredith Richardson in the fellowship hall after the service, piling casseroles onto their plates. "Dorothy," Meredith said, her smile just a little too tight. "What a surprise to see you here." "I come when I can," I replied smoothly, taking a small portion of green bean casserole. "I was sorry to miss the grand opening last night. How was it?" Frank lit up. "Oh, it was something else. That boy really did it. The place was packed. 300 people easy. The food was excellent. He's finally found his calling." 300? I repeated, keeping my tone light. "That must have been expensive to host." "Worth every cent," Meredith chimed in. "David said the publicity alone was priceless. The local paper's running a feature, and one of the morning shows might do a segment." I nodded, though inside I felt my blood pressure rise. Good thing he had the capital to cover it. "Oh, yes," Frank said proudly. "He told us he got backing from a California restaurant group. They were so impressed with his plan, they gave him exclusive rights to expand across Colorado. Brilliant move, really." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "California investors?" "That's what he said," Meredith confirmed. "Every penny." He didn't want to risk family money on such a big project. He told us that outright. I forced a smile and excused myself, claiming a headache. My pulse thudded in my ears as I walked to my car. So that was the story he had told his parents. Outside investors. No mention of me, no mention of the city loan I suspected he had applied for. That afternoon, I pulled out the phone book, a habit most people my age hadn't abandoned, and called the Denver County Clerk's office. After several transfers, a young woman named Jessica explained how I could access business filings. Within hours, I had a stack of documents printed from the county website. Hops and Harmony Brewing Company had been incorporated in March, with David listed as sole proprietor. The filing listed an initial capital of $25,000 from private sources. Not a word about California investors. But that wasn't all. Among the records was a loan application for $15,000 from the city's small business program, approved in May and dispersed in July, just in time for the grand opening. I stared at the numbers. I had given him $20,000 in November. He'd secured another $15,000 from the city in May. That was $35,000 total. Yet the official filing listed only $25,000, $10,000 unaccounted for, hidden behind vague language. I felt my hands tremble as I set the papers down. This wasn't just forgetfulness or poor communication. This was deception. That evening, I called Martha Henderson, my oldest friend. She had worked as a bookkeeper for decades and had a nose for dishonesty. "Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I invested in a family business. Now I'm not sure where the money went." "How much?" $20,000. "And I don't have paperwork, just a promise." Silence stretched on the line. Finally, she said, "Oh, honey, you need to demand an accounting right now. If he misled you about finances, that's fraud. Family or not, you have to protect yourself." "Fraud," I repeated softly, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I spoke to Harold again. "You warned me. You always said he was smooth. I should have listened." But then I wiped my eyes, straightened my back, and opened my notebook. I listed every detail I had. The check transfer, the phone calls, the conversations with Rebecca, what David's parents had told me, the documents from the county. As I wrote, my grief began to harden into resolve. I wasn't just a grandmother who had been left out of a party. I was an investor, misled and dismissed. If David thought he could take my money and erase me from his story, he was about to learn something new. 72 doesn't mean powerless. It means patient. It means underestimated. And it means I had lived long enough to know how to fight when the time came. They say revenge is best served cold, but I've always thought it tastes better when prepared with patience, precision, and a little bit of flair. Age gives you that gift. The world assumes you're harmless, too tired or too frail to make a stand. That miscalculation is a weapon if you know how to wield it. 3 weeks passed after the grand opening before I moved. 3 weeks of stewing in my kitchen, sipping coffee at dawn while stacks of papers sat neatly organized in front of me. I had the county records, the city loan documents, my notes from the night I watched the grand opening through my windshield. And each time I glanced at Harold's empty chair, I heard his steady voice in my head. Dot, if you're going to fight, fight smart. Step 1, gather allies. I started with Martha Henderson. She was more than a friend. She was a woman who had spent 40 years combing through ledgers and receipts, catching mistakes other people hoped she wouldn't. She listened patiently as I laid everything out. The $20,000 transfer, the contradictions in David's story, the lies he told his parents. Oh, honey, she said, adjusting her glasses. This isn't just sloppy. This is calculated. He took your money, added a city loan, and then erased you from the narrative. If you don't act now, he'll keep rewriting history until even you start questioning what happened. Then help me act, I said. Her eyes lit up with the same fire she'd had in her working years. I'll do more than help. I'll prepare a full accounting, every dollar he owes you with interest. We'll put it in writing, clear enough that even he can't talk around it. Next, I reached out to Patrick Murphy, Harold's nephew. Patrick was a lawyer in Denver, one of those sharp types who wore tailored suits but still carried the family's stubborn streak. I hadn't spoken to him much since Harold's funeral, but when I explained the situation, his voice grew serious. Aunt Dot, if what you're saying is accurate, David misrepresented his finances to secure your investment. That borders on fraud. You have rights, and we can enforce them. But are you ready for the fallout? Once you push, you can't unpush. Patrick, I'm 72, I said plainly. I don't have time to sit around hoping he remembers to respect me. I want this settled. He agreed to draft a demand letter, something strong enough to remind David that legal trouble was one door knock away. Still, I knew lawyers and spreadsheets weren't enough. I needed a louder voice, something David couldn't charm his way past. That's when my neighbor, Mrs. Wong, stepped into the picture. Over tea one morning, I confessed the whole story. She shook her head, her earrings swinging with disapproval. My grandson Kevin is studying journalism, she said, always looking for stories that make people think. Why not let him write about this? A grandmother backing her son-in-law only to be cast aside. That's human drama. People will listen. I hesitated. Part of me still clung to the old belief that family matters should be kept private. But then I remembered the sight of my grandchildren in matching shirts, handing flowers to their father while I sat hidden across the street. David hadn't kept family matters private. He'd erased me. If he wanted a public story, I would give him one, just not the version he imagined. Kevin turned out to be sharp, curious, and fearless in the way only young reporters can be. He brought a camera, a recorder, and more questions than I could keep up with. Mrs. Murphy, he asked, how did it feel to see everyone else celebrating that night while you sat outside? Like I'd been erased from my own life, I answered. But people forget one thing about grandmothers. We've been underestimated before. By the second week of July, I had everything. Martha's financial report, Patrick's letter, Kevin's interest in publishing the story. But I also had one final card to play. My old connections from the library's literacy program. Over 30 years of volunteering had introduced me to local reporters, activists, even politicians. I had helped their children read, and they had never forgotten. A few phone calls later, I had interest from Channel 7's consumer reporter and a features editor at the Denver Post. It was time to move. I called Rebecca on a Thursday morning. She sounded cheerful, bragging about how booked the restaurant was. That's wonderful, I said evenly. I was hoping we could all get together Sunday afternoon. A little celebration of David's success. That would be nice, but I've already invited a few friends, I cut in. A reporter, a student journalist, even someone from the Small Business Administration. They'd love to hear David's story. Silence. Then, Mom, maybe we should talk privately before... No, sweetheart. This isn't just family anymore. David has built something for the community. The community should know how it was funded. I think people will be fascinated to learn how family support made it possible. Another silence, heavier this time. I'll have David call you, she said at last. He did at 4:47 p.m. His usual charm was gone, replaced with a nervous edge. Dorothy, I hear you want to host some kind of gathering. Yes, Sunday at 2. Bring Rebecca. We'll celebrate properly. There may be some misunderstandings about the financial arrangements, he stammered. Oh, there are no misunderstandings, I replied. I have documentation. An accountant reviewed it, a lawyer prepared paperwork, and a journalist is very interested. So yes, Sunday at 2 sounds perfect. For a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. Then he said quietly, "We'll be there." Sunday arrived with sunshine so perfect it felt like a blessing. I dressed with care. Harold's pearl necklace, my best blue dress, shoes polished until they shone. If I was going into battle, I would do it with dignity. One by one, my allies arrived. Martha carrying a tin of cookies as though this were any ordinary social call. Patrick, briefcase in hand, his expression sharp. Kevin, setting up his camera with youthful enthusiasm. Even Mrs. Wong came along, claiming she wanted a front row seat. And finally, Linda Morrison from Channel 7, followed by the Post reporter. At 2 on the dot, Rebecca and David walked in. They looked like a pair heading to a funeral. "Dorothy," David began. "I never meant—" "Save it," I interrupted. "Linda, are you ready to record?" The camera light blinked red. I began. I told the story plainly, without dramatics. How my husband and I had saved for decades. How I had trusted my son-in-law with $20,000. How I had been promised repayment and respect. How I had discovered the lies, the city loan, the contradictory stories. And finally, how I had been excluded from the very celebration my money had made possible. David shifted uncomfortably as every eye in the room pinned him down. Rebecca's face was pale, her hands twisting together. "David," Linda asked, "is this true?" He swallowed hard. For once, the easy grin failed him. "Yes," he said at last. "It's true. Dorothy invested in me when no one else would. And I let the stress of starting the business blind me. I should have acknowledged her. I should have paid her back sooner. I was wrong." Patrick slid the prepared document across the table. "Then sign this. Full repayment with interest, plus acknowledgement of Dorothy as a founding investor. Otherwise, we pursue legal action." David looked around the room. The lawyer, the reporters, his trembling wife, the grandmother who refused to be erased. Then he signed. He pulled out a checkbook and scribbled the amount, $24,000. The original loan, plus interest, plus what he called a gratitude bonus. My hands shook as I accepted it, but not from weakness, from triumph. More important than the money was the document Patrick notarized that day. It declared me a founding investor in Hops and Harmony, guaranteed me permanent recognition in the business, and granted me a reserved table with a plaque bearing my name. The cameras captured it all: David's reluctant admission, my calm composure, the legal signing. 2 weeks later, the segment aired. The story framed me not as a victim, but as a savvy grandmother who had believed in her son-in-law and demanded recognition when it was denied. David came across not as a villain, but as a man humbled into gratitude. That balance saved his reputation, but it gave me mine back as well. The Denver Post ran a feature. Other seniors reached out, sharing their own experiences of being used or ignored by family. With Kevin's help, I started a weekly coffee group we cheekily named Grannies with Grievances. We laughed, we cried, and we reminded each other that age doesn't mean invisibility. My grandchildren began visiting again, this time proudly wearing shirts that read, "My grandma is a boss investor." Rebecca, ashamed and repentant, eventually admitted she had gone along with David out of fear. Fear of another failure, fear of losing the life they were building. "Mom," she said one afternoon, "I'm sorry. I thought protecting him was protecting us, but I hurt you instead." "You didn't choose him over me," I told her. "You chose fear over truth. But fear doesn't last. Truth does." Now, once a month, I drive downtown, walk into Hops and Harmony, and sit at the best table in the house. A brass plaque gleams on the wood, reserved for Dorothy Murphy, founding investor and family matriarch. Customers nod when they see it. Some ask for my story, and I tell it gladly. Because in the end, this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about respect, about proving that 72 is not the end of power, but the beginning of wisdom sharp enough to cut through any lie. Would you have gone public like Dorothy did, or handled it privately? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. When I was a girl, my grandmother used to say, "Trust is a gift, Dorothy. Give it freely, but don't be foolish. Once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to repair." I didn't fully understand those words until much later in life. For most of my years, I believed family would always choose loyalty over pride, honesty over convenience. But age has a way of showing you that even those closest to you can falter when fear, ambition, or shame clouds their judgment. Looking back on the ordeal with David and Rebecca, I don't feel the same rage that once burned in my chest. Time softens anger, and perspective gives you a broader view. What I feel now is clarity, a kind of calm wisdom that only comes after walking through humiliation, loneliness, and betrayal, and still standing tall at the other side. The first lesson is simple, though not easy. Trust, but verify. Even with family, especially with family, love makes us generous, but it can also make us blind. If I had demanded written agreements at the start, I might have spared myself sleepless nights and racing heartbeats. If I had asked harder questions, perhaps David would have respected me sooner. Trust doesn't disappear when you verify, it strengthens. Because accountability doesn't destroy love, it protects it. The second lesson is one I wish every older person could carry close to their heart. Age does not mean weakness. Society has a habit of looking at gray hair and assuming fragility. But the truth is, years of living give you sharper instincts and deeper patience than the young can imagine. When David underestimated me, he thought I would retreat quietly into the shadows, embarrassed and defeated. Instead, I waited, I planned, and I reminded him that 72 is not powerless. It is seasoned, resilient, and when necessary, unyielding. The third lesson is about respect. It cannot be begged for, nor can it be demanded without merit. It must be earned. For years, I assumed respect was automatic within families, that my role as mother and grandmother guaranteed me a seat at the table. But this experience showed me otherwise. Respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from actions. I had to claim my place, not by yelling or sulking, but by standing firm in truth. And once I did, respect returned tenfold, not just from David, but from Rebecca, my grandchildren, and even strangers who read my story. Now when I sit at my reserved table in Hops and Harmony, I don't sit there for the free meal or the recognition. I sit there because it reminds me of what was nearly taken from me: dignity. The brass plaque with my name isn't just a decoration. It is a marker that says, "You mattered. You mattered enough to fight for." My grandchildren have changed, too. Where once they wore shirts declaring their father's success, they now boast proudly that their grandmother was the investor who made it possible. Katie told me one afternoon, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you. Not just nice, strong." Tommy, in his blunt way, added, "Yeah, Dad says he's never messing with you again." We all laughed, but behind the laughter was truth. They had seen me stand tall when it mattered. They had learned a lesson I hope stays with them long after I'm gone. Kindness is valuable, but strength is essential. Rebecca, too, found her voice in the aftermath. One evening, as we washed dishes side by side in my kitchen, she admitted what she had been too ashamed to say before. "Mom, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. I thought supporting David meant silencing myself. But I hurt you in the process. I'm sorry." I placed my hand on hers. "Sweetheart, silence never protects anyone for long. Truth always finds its way through. What matters is that you see it now." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I see it, and I'll never let fear make me blind again." As for David, well, pride dies hard, but even he changed. At first, his public apology felt forced, like a man cornered with no choice but to yield. But over time, I noticed something shift. He started checking in on me, not with excuses, but with genuine conversation. He included me in business updates, asked my opinion on menu ideas, even invited me to meet his new suppliers. "Dorothy," he said once, his voice steady and sincere. I was wrong. You believed in me when no one else would. I let that belief turn into entitlement. I don't want to make that mistake again. For the first time, I believed him. Not because of his words, but because of his actions. He began paying me dividends from the business voluntarily, even though he had already repaid the loan. And every time he saw me at the restaurant, he made sure to introduce me as our founding investor, the woman who made this dream possible. That perhaps is the final lesson. People can change, but not because you beg them to. They change when truth forces them to look in the mirror. They change when someone holds them accountable, firmly and without apology. When I tell this story now, people often ask me if I regret giving David the money in the first place. I don't. Regret suggests that nothing good came from the decision, but I gained something more valuable than money. I gained proof of my own strength, respect from my family, and a voice that will not be ignored again. If Harold could see me now, I think he would smile that half smile of his, shake his head and say, Dot, I always knew you had it in you. So here is what I leave with you, dear listener. Trust, but verify. Don't let age convince you that you're invisible. Respect yourself enough to demand the same from others. And when life puts you in the shadows, don't be afraid to step into the light and remind the world who you are. Because the truth is, betrayal is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is the beginning of a chapter where you finally claim your strength. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales like this. Thank you for watching.